Hi and welcome to CTN's webinar on professional graces, working with social anxieties in the workplace or in the office. Today's is going to be extremely relevant. We're so glad that you're here to join us. My name is Becca Wright. I'm just going to kick us off and turn it over to the panel. I'd like to share with you very quickly how today's session is going to go. Can you see my screen? Jess, Skye, can you see it?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Without hardly any ado, we're going to hop into today's panel because we want to give as much airtime as possible to this issue. We'll come together in about the last 10 minutes to introduce next month's webinar. And please stick around till the end because we're going to give away, we're going to conduct our raffle during today's panel. And at the end, we're going to give away one of our program management modules that is about assessing and analyzing needs within a community and within your program. Very quickly, I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're going to talk about social anxieties and how those manifest. We're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to work with a social anxiety, what it's like to work with others who have social anxieties. We're going to touch on some coping mechanisms. We're going to touch on some strategies about how workplaces can be more inclusive and how we as employees can be communicative and can be supportive of probably the many different manifestations of social anxieties that are taking place all around us as we're trying to get work done, right? I'd like to introduce today's panel and also hit just a couple of highlights of the folks. The facilitator for today's panel is DeAnne Cuellar. She is the Associate Director for Outreach, Community Broadband Networks at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Just a couple of highlights about DeAnne. She's a tech equity advocate and a communication strategist. She's from San Antonio. She's joining us from San Antonio. She has also served as Mayor Ron Nirenberg's digital inclusion appointee to the City of San Antonio's Innovation and Technology Committee, which has resulted in several policy and funding priorities to close the digital divide. Joining us also today, we have Cordelia Mcgee-Tubb. She's many things, a design technologist, a digital accessibility specialist, and a cartoonist. For the past decade, she's actually volunteered for CTN as a technology tutor for older adults. Cordelia also serves on CTN's board. And she's an artist whose comics, she sees her comics as a medium for self-expression and community building. And I have a handful of some very wonderful comics that I will include in the chat once the panel gets going. Last but not least, we have Skye Downing, who is the Director for Partnerships and Programs here at CTN. Skye is also the lead, the director of our capacity building initiative within CTN, all of the curriculum and outreach that we do for capacity building. Skye has worked in the nonprofit sector for over 2 decades, specializing in adult and community-based education. I have grown to know Skye very well, working for her and with her over the last year. And I would like to say that I have seen how she treats those around her as a whole person. She's actually deeply committed to serving the needs and being aware of the needs of those around her. This starts in her home. She's a parent to a special needs teenager. And she also, oh, I'm sorry. And she also is a caregiver for a senior citizen who lives with her and is also a jazz musician, just as she is, a blues singer, just as she is. So she actually is deeply committed to meeting needs within her own home and her own life, and that extends to the workforce as well, where she is committed to building partnerships and programs, not just for digital inclusion, but for spreading awareness of these issues that affect us in the workplace, like social anxiety. I'm going to stop my share. I would like to ask you one more time to please mute yourself. Please just take a moment and make sure that you're muted. Out of respect for everyone else, sometimes we can forget that. Thank you once again. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Please ask your questions in the chat. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our panel and to our facilitator, DeAnne.
Hi, thank you so much for bringing this event together. I'm going to say I'm really happy to be here, but full transparency, since we're in a safe space, socially anxious while we're talking about social anxieties. But yeah, here we are. I wanted to have like this interactive conversation with the other speakers today, not just like throw them a question and then throw them a question. I wanted to start with a story that I feel like the other speakers can speak to as a way of level setting on this topic. I'm going to share a little bit about my identity as well, and I'm going to ask the other speakers to share as much about themselves as they want to. And this is not about us saying that like I speak for everybody that identifies as this way. It's just a better way of you getting to know me and understand where I'm coming from in my current living experience, lived and living experience. I'm also going to I'm also going to say that when we're talking about mental health and health in general as people and humans, that there's a lot of still a lot of discomfort about what someone can say and can ask. So we are reserving a good amount of time in the chat and for questions that we'll be answering after we get done. So I want you to know that if you think you're going to use the wrong word and you're scared you're going to use the wrong word, that like that's okay. We're gonna say how to say something better. We're going to share like where you can find resources and a lot of topics, because we will be using some jargon that might be not jargon for us, but might be jargon for people that are just joining. And I'm going to start with a couple of words you might hear often today. I'm just forecasting we might hear often today is you might hear the term neurodivergent or neurodiverse often. And so to level set for those terms, neurodivergent is the person. So I am neurodivergent. I'm autistic. I'm also someone who lives with epilepsy. And of course, because these things exist together, which is called a comorbidity, you don't just have one thing, you have more than one thing. I also happen to also live with anxiety and depression. And neurodiverse is of a people. So there's neurodivergent individuals, and then collectively, humans with a brain are part of a all of us with a brain are part of a neurodiverse community. So that's just to let you know, when we're saying neurodivergent, we're talking about individual. And when we're saying neurodiverse, we're talking about a community. So let's just jump right in. Skye wasn't able to go to the conference this year, Net Inclusion, in Philadelphia, but a lot of us maybe on this call did. And I wanted to say something about the conferences. At the conference, inclusion, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance has inclusion in the name of its organization. So they go out of their way to really create, inclusive events. And I thought it was interesting, Cordelia and Skye, that when I got to the conference and I got my badge and my swag bag, that they had these stickers. I think they were like yellow, orange, and green. And green meant like when someone greeted you, they could come all in, like if you wanted a hug or a handshake or a pat on the back. And then yellow meant like fist bump, give me some distance. And I think the red or pink one was like nothing, like no hugs, no fist bumps, sensitive, right? And I didn't put like one pink or red sticker. I put like five. I was just like five, right? I will hug you after I get to know you, but I'm not typically like a big hugger, big handshaker. I'm that child that sings the boundary song. Like, this is a boundary. This is a boundary. So I wanted to ask, let's start with you, Cordelia. Like, what do you think about that story? Because even though I put like those stickers like on my comforts badge, nobody really saw them, and I'm not a mean person, so I like I have to go with the flow sometimes because we're trying to socialize with one another in this world. But yeah, like everybody wanted to hug me, everyone to hug me, everybody wanted to shake my hand, and everybody wanted to like come in for like something. What do you think about that?
Yeah, first of all, I love that conferences are starting to include I went to a conference recently where they didn't have those stickers, but they had stickers for extrovert, introvert, and ambivert, which were also kind of in a similar vein. I think you mentioned, boundaries being really important of setting boundaries, but I think there's also um, setting community expectations of it sounded almost like you identified your boundaries, but people didn't necessarily respect those. So I think that's something that as like organizers of events, we can really make sure that people are aware of what those boundaries mean. And I wanted to share a little story of I was so a little about me. I have social anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and depression, and wasn't really diagnosed with those things until I was an adult. So I spent a lot of my childhood just not knowing how to deal with these things, not knowing how to cope in social situations. And I had oh my goodness, my niece who is going on 6 this week, but when she was 3 or 4, for her fourth birthday party, I noticed she was getting overwhelmed by there being so many people. And she literally just said, I need to have some quiet time. I'm going to go sit by myself. And she left and sat in her room for half an hour. And then she said, I'm ready to come back to the party. And she went back out to the party. And I was so impressed, but also like honestly very jealous that she had that vocabulary at such a young age to be able to advocate for her needs and her boundaries. And everyone around her just respected it. So I think it's I feel like we're at a turning point in society where people are we're creating safer spaces for people to not just set their boundaries, but communicate their boundaries, and then have those be respected. So I don't know if that was my story in response to your story, DeAnne, but um, yeah, I love that more and more spaces are providing these ways by default for people to share their boundaries, like rather than it being something that you have to go out of your way to say. It's something that is just implicit um, in the kind of the social contract of the space.
Yep. Skye, before I jump to you on this, wanted to see if you have anything to say about this. It's Skye, because Skye, I think you've dealt like with, this topic in like multiple environments, not just like the work environment, but the home environment, school environment, and the professional environment. One of the things about mental health being destigmatized is like it's not just about being able to say out loud that like this is what I'm living through, is what I'm living with. It's also part of the destigmatizing the world is that, well, like the world we move in is also going to have to like a change, and also in order for us to move in different spaces together. What do you have a story like that, Becca? I mean, not Becca, Skye.
That's okay. I'm happy to be confused with Becca. I do indeed. And in fact, I'll start with speaking to the sticker thing. Two funny stories about that. So Becca gave a wonderful introduction of how folks may or may not know me in the world, but to further introduce myself and make clear why I am sitting on this panel today, I actually move about in this world as what is considered a highly sensitive person, an HSP, or in more technical terms, a sensory processing sensitive, an SPS. It is a neurodivergent condition or trait, actually, not condition. So this is not a diagnosis, but more of a way of being. It means that I feel things on a very deep level. You may hear terms like empathy or empath thrown around. For much of my life, I actually considered myself a spiritual empath and thought that I was very seeing and knowing, and I am because I'm a very deep thinker. But it was only recently in my life that I came to the understanding that that empathy and that deep thinking and that sensory processing sensitivity really was rooted in a highly traumatized condition. It came from going through much trauma in my childhood, and then also is joined in with a healthy case of PTSD now from trauma that my son and I have shared in his mental health journey. So I walk around the world just feeling all the feels all the time at a very extreme level. And yet the way that I cope with that is that I'm very out when I'm out in the world, and then I crash and I'm super internal. So when I'm home, I am down, I hit my walls, I cannot think, I cannot speak, I won't answer the phone, I just melt, But when I'm out, you know me as the smiley, huggy, lovey person that I am at my core. I'm just very protective of it. So at NDIA Net Inclusion, the year before, I put 3 green stickers on my badge. I'm like, I'm the hugger. We're fresh out of pandemic. Like, hug me. I will hug you back. But I was very, very sensitive to those that didn't have the same. And also sometimes, I found it surprising and enlightening to see who didn't and who had different modes that they wished to meet in person so people that I had been speaking to and developed very deep connections with over the virtual online years, and then meeting them in person and being like, oh, they don't want to hug. And so yeah, boundaries. But that said, I had Becca this last year at NDIA ask Lo, or at Net Inclusion, excuse me, if we could borrow a set of stickers for another conference we were going to, because they didn't offer that kind of thing. And I love it so much as a way of being inclusive and accessible. So I would just share a little bit more about high sensitivity too. For those of you that don't know, HSPs make up about 30% of the world's population, male and female, or otherwise identifying. That is 1 in 5 people in the workforce, y'all. So 1 in 5 people are seriously deeply sensitive people and require certain aspects of their workplace environment to operate a little differently in order to be successful. And that said, high sensitivity too, while it is not a diagnosis or a condition, but a trait, it is linked to genetic variations in how the brain handles the neurochemicals such as serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, easy for me to say. And it is believed to be a trait that has evolved out of being a survival mechanism, allowing individuals such as myself to detect threats and also opportunities that others may or may not see as clearly right off the bat.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it when y'all was talking, but like if you and we got lots of links to drop for y'all, but like if you ever want to like just look at the how the brain has so many different cognitive cognitive markers, we'll call them that. It's so interesting. And that, you know, even if you're someone that is, you know, diagnosed, not diagnosed, and you think that like you don't, you know, that your brain is just like the brain that everybody else has, like it's not, because the way that social anxieties show up, which is why I think we picked that umbrella term, is that like you, when someone says I live with anxiety and depression, or I live with anxiety, it's not the same as you know, something exciting is going to happen and I'm anxious, you know, like there's the different chemicals that, you know, Skye was identifying, is because the brain shows up for us in ways that our brain was born a certain way. So a lot of us have, you know, reactions with our body because our brain was born in a certain way. So when I say that I'm autistic, like I didn't develop autism. I was born with autism. My brain was born a certain way. It developed a certain shape. Therefore, I land on the map here, but I have epilepsy, but the epilepsy is because I have a head injury. So that is something that was caused from my environment. So it's much more, I'm not a doctor and I don't have a mental health background, but like as someone that lives with these things, you get at some point you get into diagnostics and reading, because you know, you want to figure out how to like to live your best life. I'm trying to I would like to live and have the opportunity to get old, you know. And so that's why I really try to, you know, better understand. But talking about coping mechanisms, which I think this is actually like a good topic to go into, and it's to share a little bit more jargon. Some of the ways that people that are living with social anxiety, different social anxieties, is a term that some people are becoming more familiar with, which is stimming and spinning. So short term is stims and spins. And again, everybody stims, you know, it's like, they just like, I see it, even though like people don't say like, I'm stimming, like I identify other people. And I don't know, not everybody has spins, but stims is a type of emotional regulation. So when Skye, when you were sharing that, like after you go to an event, you're like super duper huggy, and then you come home and you're just like, I gotta like turn in, like same thing. I had an all day event yesterday. You know, I was all day, was like 8:30 to 4. So of course, when I came home last night, like I was staring at the wall, you know, I was like staring at the wall. And so there's different ways to recuperate. And stimming, you could see somebody fidgeting. And then special interest is, you know, somebody really likes a topic like a lot. And that like really getting into a topic, like I could say, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say like collectively, I think I can safely say that the three of us as speakers are really interested in digital equity work, you know. And like digital equity work not only like is a job that we do, but it like emotionally makes us feel good, right? Like, you know, so we might actually, like, if like me, if I'm having a bad day, you would think that I would not want to work, but because digital equity is such a special topic to me that fulfills me emotionally, like I would probably try to make myself feel better by maybe doing something around the digital equity work. Do y'all want to talk about that a little bit? Like not just about stims and spins, but just about like different ways that you're coping, whether within the digital equity work or just yourself personally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it counts as, but like one thing that I do in meetings, for instance, is I just doodle a lot. And I'm aware that sometimes that makes it seem like I'm not paying attention, but it's actually something that I find calming, something that actually helps my brain. You know, I keep my hands busy, so my brain is more able to absorb the content. So I'm always like in meetings, like I know I'm drawing, but I'm actually paying way more attention than if I weren't drawing right now. So that's one tool that I use to just kind of actually, ironically, be more present in the moment. And I love what you talked about, DeAnne, about how like throwing ourselves into our work. I think a lot of people end up doing that because it feels good to be productive. I think with my anxiety, I often end up kind of in this like spiral of worry, you know, and spiral of indecision. And so to be able to kind of step out of my own head and put put all of that like anxious brain energy towards a problem that helps other people feels really rewarding, and also just, again, yeah, helps me calm down. So those are a few of the things that I do. So that resonated a lot with me, DeAnne, what you were saying.
Yeah, and I to build off of both of you, because I think we there are distinct similarities in our coping mechanisms. I would say that yeah, we tend to be hyper focused on things, so or we have the ability to be very hyper focused on things. And speaking for myself personally, yeah, I do what we call on my team rabbit holing all the time. I am definitely one that goes down the rabbit hole of whatever it is that I'm focused on in that moment, which can really be a superpower in the workplace. Because we are the people that have this kind of deep understanding of a subject matter because we've gone there with it. We are the people that think outside the box. We're very creative and innovative in our approaches to things because we're always looking for solutions. We're thinking things through like far past there might be a beginning and an end date to something, or a beginning and an end to something. And we're thinking long past that and long before it. So we're thinking about the whole picture all the time and then some, kind of prepared for any scenario. I know my dear friends say, like, if the world really truly does come to an end, I want you there with me because I'm very resourceful and resilient, so but yeah, and we're amazingly, as much as we talk about anxiety and and how hard it can be to be out in the world, we're actually very adaptable because we've had to adapt throughout our lives in order to exist in a world that does not see or acknowledge these things that we are, managing on a daily basis. So commonly, anyway. So yeah, so we have a lot of superpowers, we do, but that can also lead to some challenges as far as the other side, the yin and yang of it.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up the word calmly, because I'm gonna give myself grace and credit when I say this, that like I'm trying to be, I live with OCD too, and I'm trying to be less OCD, right? Because like I can very much, when it comes to inclusive language, be like because of my OCD, I could like obsess about that. And so when I say this is like, I'm going to preface this story like this. Like my social anxiety has gotten the best of me in my workplace sometimes. Like I was just at a gala in DC, and we were all dressed up, right? It's a gala, and I walked in there and every table had eucalyptus on it. So the entire theater was like piercing my amygdala with, and I love eucalyptus, right? But being somebody with, sensory overload, and the flashing lights and the music and the big event, I went up to the event organizer and I was just like, how could you, and then after I calmed down, and I did, because that was my, not my brightest, I went over to them and I said, like, I'm so sorry. I'm sensitive, and I should have, other people are too. But it was an example where, I was not able to mask, and masking, which is another new term that, it's not new for a lot of people, but it might be new for other people, is that sometimes, people are holding it in so much that it can make you ill. And so it has to come out in some way. And it doesn't always come out in a way that's considered, neurotypical or neuronormative, right? And I think we're actually getting into a place, like back to your niece, was it your niece, Cordelia? Is that like, we're in the process of building the spaceship as we're on it, as we often say. It's like we're in the process of building that environment so that when, something like that happens, like instead you could say, I in this moment I cannot, do X, so I'm going to like go take care of myself first, and come back. But I think the reason why this is much more this is what I want y'all to talk about much more. Let's say, like, I'll say this might be showing up on your Instagram or your Facebook or your TikTok feed more, is because I'm glad we're an all-female panel today, is that it's not that there's more people with mental health issues or there's a neurodiverse movement. It's just that diagnostics and testing is catching up. So it's not, that's why it's more salient. That's why you see it more. And so just like all things in science, it's evolving with times. And typically, historically, women and women of color and men of color were not tested as often. And the test did not exist to diagnose people. So that's why there are people that are like, you know, just now finding the words or the terms to understand like what they're living with. And masking is something that I try to do less of, because I did it for so long that I made myself so uncomfortable, which is why like I used to let people hug me, and now I'm like, no hugs, you know. Do y'all want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I feel it's so important. This brings up the aspect of change and growth. And thankfully we are seeing some of that slow, albeit slow but sure, and I know, as a parent to a child with mental health disorder, like the it's a painful process to try and get to services, to try and get to health, to try and get to diagnoses, even because it is a process of ruling out based on similar symptoms. And so you go through this phase where it could be this, it could be that, it could be, and all of us share a lot of those similar symptoms, right? So but yeah, like DeAnne, I've in my 50th year now, I am very focused on dropping the masking coping mechanism. I mean, it will always exist because it is absolutely a survival technique, and sometimes it's all you have, and you just can't help it, but for the most part, yeah, I want to show up as, who I am. And I feel very blessed that we exist in this community where we feel that inclusion and access is at the top of our priority list in the work that we do, particularly in, we often use the terminology like meeting people where they're at. Well, here at CTN, we talk about, we don't just meet the client where they're at, but we want to meet our partners where they're at. We want to understand what their needs are. And so internally then inside of the professional mechanism, inside of the workflow, inside of your teams, internally, you also want to be meeting each other where you're at and really having that understanding and that openness to learn. And then hopefully the support from your organization to adapt and develop, more policies and more accessible approaches to things.
Yeah. Yeah. Cordelia, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about diagnosis. So I remember early on in my career when I was, undiagnosed for all of these mental health conditions that I have, I really struggled at work. I mean, I still struggle at work, right? But I really struggled because so much of work is about interpersonal communications, and I wasn't able to speak up in meetings. I wasn't, you know, able to make decisions quickly because I was so worried about making the wrong decision. And I really got down on myself and, doubled down on my depression of thinking that I was bad at my job, right? Because all of these things were things that go into like performance reviews of how well do you communicate with others. And I felt like a failure. And in getting this diagnosis, it helped me kind of like something I'm still trying to figure out is where are the areas where, I can change how I approach my work, and where are the areas that are just intrinsically me, and realizing that it's not a fail, like both realizing that I'm not a failure, but also that I have unique attributes that I can bring to the team of especially being so anxious about doing the right thing. I'm hyper aware of what kind of like Skye was talking about, hyper aware of how other people are feeling, how they're perceiving things. So instead of maybe being, the chief technical, like making all the technical decisions for the team, I leaned into more of making sure that the team had the support that they needed, because that was something I was hyper aware of. So partly, where was I going with this? So partly having this diagnosis just helped me realize where I can stretch myself and where I can't. And it helped me figure out strengths that I didn't realize I had. I'll also note I have several friends who recently got diagnosed with ADHD. They thought they were struggling at work, and then they got diagnosed with ADHD, and then found a bunch of ADHD like coping tools to help them, manage this increasingly very overwhelming, overstimulating digital workplace environment that we're in, right? Like, it is hard to work now because you have things coming at you in 5 million different communication channels. And sometimes the diagnosis can just help you get the resources that you need. In my case, it helped me get the medication that I need to make it possible for me to do my work more sustainably. And it also, like I mentioned, helped me figure out what my boundaries are and where I can stretch myself to actually help the team in ways that I didn't realize before.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I I think we talked about this before before today, like we were going to talk about, diagnoses. I will share that people come up to me. I came out like, because I was very much in, like, I did not share, these parts of me outside of my closest friends, but COVID really, like, because of COVID, I had to be like, well, I have to share what I need in order for me to get the accommodations I need in order to do my job. And so I just share some parts of me, and then I decided, it was easier to share than it was to hide it, because there are parts of it that I cannot hide. And now that I've, it's been like 3 going on 4 years that people have known, I have people come up to me randomly, as I'm eating or I'm out in the public, and tell me, like, because of you, I went to go get tested and found out I had ADHD. Like, I had a friend, that said, like, I just, she didn't think she was autistic, but she just wanted to know, like, better understand her brain. And she got the medication that she didn't know she needed. And now she just feels so, like, different. And she feels like she's, living her life, much better. And then I had another friend who, did think they were autistic, and, went to the doctor. And as they were getting, the diagnostics and the interviews, that person was like, no, that doesn't sound like me. That sounds like my wife, and then it shifted, but yeah, what I would say about diagnoses is, there's a lot of stuff online to just, put one toe in, and always look for, like, the best information, because we live in a time with so much information, go to trusted sources for information. We shared some links with you. Like, that's a really good mix of, like, professional resources with really, reputable people. And there's also different, tastes and flavors that we gave you. And yeah, and then, I mean, if you want to get tested, no one's going to say, like, don't get tested. No one's ever going to say, like, don't seek, medical attention. But to shift a little bit before we're out of time on the diagnostics, I'm going to do, let's call this, like, for you and Skye, like a temperature test. How do you feel when, and just because you don't have a diagnosis, I'll preface this by saying, just because you do not have a diagnosis does not mean you are not seen or not heard. Not everybody has access to the medical services. This is a whole nother webinar. It's a whole nother webinar. How do you feel when people say things like, I'm a little OCD? I'm a little OCD. Or that's crazy. That's insane.
For me, the little OCD, I think obsessive compulsive disorder is one of, like, a very misunderstood mental health disorder of a lot of times people see it as like, I need all of these pictures behind me to be straight. Um, Spoiler alert, none of these are straight and I'm dealing with it. But actually obsessive compulsive disorder is often rooted in these very, very deep and very disturbing thoughts that you have that something will go horribly, horribly wrong if you don't do this one little thing. So it's been it it was actually, and I difficult as a child because I remember in high school, everyone would be like, I'm so OCD. Oh, I'm so OCD. I need this thing to be just like this. And so I was struggling with those like deep intrusive thoughts. And I was like, I guess everyone is like, maybe I have OCD, but I guess everyone is dealing with it. So I should just like suck it up and like, mask, and it took a while for me to learn actually there's a difference between people saying I'm so OCD and the actual like mental illness that I have. I will say something just on the note of sharing of I am very vocal about what I go through because, and I see people talking about this in the chat, when you share, it helps other people feel less alone. And I know a lot of other people don't feel comfortable sharing, and that is totally fine. So I tend to overshare because I really want to make sure that people know that they're not alone in this. I will say I had a very awkward experience, right, where people on my team knew that I had OCD. A few people on my team knew that I had OCD at a previous company, and then someone in a meeting was like, "Oh, I'm so OCD about this thing." And I guess someone had messaged them on the side to be like, Cordelia actually has OCD. Like, don't say I'm so OCD. And then that person interrupted part of the rest of the meeting to be like, oh, I just wanted to apologize to Cordelia for saying I'm so OCD. And that made it kind of all worse, right? Of that's the kind of thing that you would want to talk to someone about privately. So I would say that if you are very comfortable sharing about yourself, be mindful of the fact that other people might not be comfortable sharing about them. And so you never want to just like call out um, uh, someone else's mental health considerations, because especially just in a large meeting like that, it was kind of awkward, right? I'm going on a tangent here, DeAnne, but yeah, I feel a little weird about people using those terms because it does seem to almost like invalidate the deep experiences that people are really struggling with. And I think we're getting better as a society of like moving away from those terms.
Yeah. Yes. Skye, I know you've got something to add.
I do on this one. You bet. Yeah, so I'll start by saying we're an evolved culture and we can do better than this. So I'll just start by saying that like we have learned that there are more and less appropriate ways to communicate. So we should always, as humans, just be challenging ourselves to do the best that we can with that, with mistakenly, taking on labels and and using terminology inappropriately. That said, I think we will all continue learning, and so hopefully we'll continue to adapt. But this does bring up, I follow a spiritual teacher that spoke about this the other day in a presentation, and it stuck with me. And she said that the point at which that we call something a disorder or a disability is the point at which it starts to scare people or put people off because we're calling ourselves by a different name, aka we're giving it a label that they don't understand. And because they don't understand it, they will often disassociate us from the label. And I think that could be the very thing that's at the root of when human beings say things just off the cut, like, oh man, he's crazy, she's crazy, and then that said, I would take this a step further and I would say that I'm much more offended by people doubting or questioning a diagnosis or a label than I am by them mistakenly using it. And I will share an example. when my son and I were in the throes of it, I mean, from a very young age, he started displaying manic and even, I mean, some very, very scary characteristics. I'll just say that. His first attempt on his life was at 7 years old. And we received, diagnoses and medicated treatment at that time. So he's been medicated ever since. My son is homebound. He receives 15 hours of mental health care in home per week. And I work from home in order to be able to facilitate that care for him. He is thriving now, and I would almost go so far as to say in a state of remission. So if you don't know this, there are remission stages to our traits, our conditions. There are times where we are healthy and well, and these things are at bay. And then there are times when it's dysregulation central, and we're triggered and we're off, we're off step. But that said, I have battled long and hard in the public school system. My son now goes to school from home at University of Texas High School, and they have been amazing. But before then, I was in a public school district, and just constantly having to advocate and teach and fight and scream and yell and pull my hair out to get my son the care that he needed, because these leaders, these folks that were trained, I'm going to, air quote that, to presumably work with my child and meet his needs, were treating his needs as behaviors and things that he could control. And the principal of his elementary school actually came up to me one day and was nose to nose with me, which was step one, the most awful piece, spitting in my face saying, "Your child is not bipolar. He does not have a mental health disorder. You need to be a stricter parent." And I was just like,
oh my
sorry.
goodness.
Yeah, I was like, I'm sorry. Take 5 steps back first before I, shove you back. And 2, I didn't realize you got your psychiatry degree since the last time we met. So yeah, from my camp, I would just say that doubting diagnoses or speaking out of turn in regards to diagnoses, like, "Oh, well, I had a sister who was bipolar and she was really crazy." Look, we just have to, we know better. We can do better than that.
Right. If there are any questions with the last few minutes that we have, please put them in the chat. I do see a comment that I do want to address. And the person says that they find it, I'm not going to mention their name because I don't know if they want to mention, but I'm going to say I find it dangerous to one's career to let others that you work with know, especially your boss or HR. So yes, that is real. That is something that that everybody here's the thing. People living with disabilities are federally protected, right? But not all mental health, let's just say, is such a huge topic, and social anxiety is such a huge topic. Not every mental health indicator or diagnosis is labeled a disability nor a disorder. So it gets complicated, and not all, like, I can say that people living with disabilities are federally protected, but that doesn't mean that other indicators of a person's health are federally protected. That's the world we're living in. July happens to also be Disability Pride Month. I think Cordelia reminded me of that. I think the ADA was signed into law this week. I think it's the anniversary of the ADA being signed into law. I will tell you, we didn't want to be super confessional, but I will share with you that I've lived both situations. I have lived with telling my boss and telling my my direct people I report to that this is who I am, and these are the accommodations I need. And I've lived through being treated in a way that did not work for me. It was uncomfortable, because this is a world that we're still building, and that's a real fear. And then I've also lived, and I'm also living in and working in an environment where before I even took the job, I said, this is who I am. And these are the public accommodations I need to do my job. And they had the opposite reaction. The person I work for was like, great, like that makes our team so much more diverse and brings such a new perspective, to the work that we're doing. I believe he might even shared it on LinkedIn. He was like so excited that, that we were diversifying, but I wasn't a diversity hire. Like he didn't, the job I should, because these kind of topics are being discussed right now in mainstream media. I was offered the job before I even shared those things, with my boss, which there are many things to read about whether or not you should share before or after. People have many opinions about this. But I decided that I wanted to practice self-love for myself, which is hard to do. And I wanted to say, like, this is what I need. But as Skye said, like she said, it was a superpower earlier. There are things that I would not wish on anybody. Because living with some things are so hard. It's so painful. I would not wish on anybody. But there are things that, because I've learned to work a certain way, that I feel like I'm really good at certain things, So I think that's where we get into like the lived and living experiences, is that, you are adding, like, the more diverse the teams we build, the more opinions and the more ways to do things, more innovative ways, more collaborative ways. So I don't want to run out of time, but I want to see if anybody wants to talk. So we didn't get a lot of questions. Do y'all want to talk a little bit about this, like share or not share? Because Cordelia, you kind of touched on it, like that in a couple of ways about how been in environments where you've shared and not shared about, who you are.
Yeah, and I'd love to just comment on that. I think I have been in a really privileged place working in accessibility focused teams at companies that have employee resource groups that value diversity, where I feel like it is safe for me to talk about, who I am and what I go through. And so that has actually been really empowering for me, of knowing that other people may not be safe to talk about those things with their managers or with other folks. Like I see it as my responsibility to make a more inclusive workspace so that the people who can't speak up about these things have a place where they feel like they can be themselves, even if they can't, self-identify as openly. I think if you have a company that has employee resource groups, a lot of companies start with employee resource groups around. Usually, it's like women starting with women as the first group, and then branching out from there. I was at a tech startup where we started an employee resource group around accessibility and disability and mental health, and really as a group. So rather, people could join as allies or as people who identified with these things. And as a group, we collectively advocated for more inclusive meetings, more inclusive spaces. So that was a way that we could kind of that people could be more anonymous but still get that support from the collective group. So I will say that, yeah, it is unfortunately still not safe in a lot of places to talk as openly. And I'm trying to do the best that I can to make it a safer place for people.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I just really quickly want to say that I see a question that says, how can we be supportive of a friend or a coworker working with a disability? And I think there's a number of ways, inside of the system or organization. Very good question. We might have to take that one offline. As a mother, how would you encourage other mothers to stay positive? You are welcome to reach out to me anytime and I will talk your ear off. But a whole lot of faith. But yeah, best practices inside of the workspace is understanding people have individualized needs and that those needs may not be visible to you. So this is not a condition often these are not conditions that we see readily necessarily, unless that person is actually really struggling. That's when you can see, because our behaviors change, right? So, or unless we've communicated openly with you. So individualized support, you know, understanding and providing individualized support based on the person's needs and preferences, clearly communicating what's needed inside of the workforce, direct communication, providing written instructions whenever available, because a lot of times when we're talking, our brains are 3,000 miles ahead. And, you know, so yeah, so written follow-up is always good. Flexible work arrangements, flexible work environments, remote work, being able to work with your camera off if need be, you know, controlling your workspace if you work from home. Sensory friendly environments if you are in a brick and mortar, so creating quiet spaces, allowing noise canceling headphones, things like that. Regular check-ins if you are a manager or overseeing a staff member, so that you ensure that you are addressing any concerns in an expeditious way, and adjusting accommodations. And then strengths-based approaches, so focusing on the strengths of your team members and the talents that they bring to the table. You know, as we've discussed today, we have a lot of superpowers. We have a lot of things that we're really good at, and we by now hopefully know what those things are, and we'll hyper focus on them for you. So there's that. But yeah, there are some challenges inside of the workspace for sure, and there's so much more that we could talk about, but I know we're at time, so
we are at time, and we have to but we're available. Our information is shared. We shared a bunch of links. We could talk on this topic all day. But Becca, would you bring us home?
I certainly will, and I have the hard task of just cutting it off. Here's what we'll do, folks. Give me 2 more minutes, and I promise we'll finish on time out of respect for everyone's lunch period and meeting period. What we'll do when we send our typical follow-up with the video and with the resources, I will make sure that we send a couple of conclusive thoughts from each of our panelists today. They each also have specialties that we just weren't able to get to. And so that'll just be a little bonus for our attendance today. I'd like to conclude with drawing your attention to next month's webinar, August 29th. I put the link in the chat. We're going to talk about another important population, which is college students who struggle with digital inclusion. Can we even believe that school starts up next month? Let's not even talk about it. But with that right around the corner, we want to address in a very timely way what college students face with digital inclusion. And we're actually going to have a panel with college students and with some college practitioners. So please take a look at that registration link and join us. The free giveaway today, our team member Jess conducted the raffle using our special app that we use. So what we're giving away today to our raffle winners is a free enrollment in one of our Digital Lift program management courses. It's called Assess and Analyze. So it's all about needs assessments, templates, community mapping, using community strengths, and we provide a variety of resources for how to collect data, clean the data, evaluate the data, and report out. So again, that's our first program module, and here's who we're giving it away to. Amy Zarita, Bunny Frost, and Camille Doggett. Amy Zarita, Bunny Frost, Camille Doggett, I will follow up with you after this with your free enrollment. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you for your active participation, and I'm promising you a timely email follow-up with some bonus content. A special thank you to DeAnne for facilitating, and to Cordelia and Skye for taking the time to talk so frankly and authentically and helpfully about such an important topic, particularly in our cultural moment. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next month. Thank you.